Good morning and welcome to Criminal Justice Insider. I'm BABZ RAWLS-IVY. This is Criminal Justice Insider with Jeff Grant. BABZ RAWLS-IVY, brought to you by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, now more than ever. So this morning I'm talking to Lewis Reed, the national organizer for hashtag Cut50. Good morning. Good morning, Lewis.
Good morning, Babs. How are you?
I'm
Good morning,
fine.
Jeff. How are you?
I believe I know you. I believe we know each other.
We very well may know each other. Connecticut is but the size of somebody's backyard in New York City. So I think that we very well may know each other.
So you're the national organizer for hashtag Cut50. Am I saying hashtag right? Should I say hashtag? Yes.
You don't have to say hashtag. It's just Cut50.
Okay, Cut50, an initiative of Van Jones's Dream Corps. So you come to this job with a lot of experience in government and criminal justice, policy advocacy, business and public health. I know you from Bridgeport. That's how I know you. You were holding it down in Bridgeport in the mayor's office, weren't you?
Yes, absolutely. I had that. I had the distinct privilege of actually being the reentry director for the city of Bridgeport for approximately for a year. Until, I got caught up in a little bit of exercise the aberration of judgment and deference of character, was rearrested and, had a slight fall from grace in that role. But I do believe our paths very well may have intersected while I was in that capacity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what brings you to Van Jones's Cut50? And tell me what Cut50 is.
Sure. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you for the work that you are doing, just in terms of amplifying the voices of people who have actually been impacted by the criminal justice system, and not just people who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system, but people who have been indirectly impacted by the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, when you are in positions as such, people can actually feel as though that their voices are muted. And just, the work that you are doing and the issues that you are amplifying through your medium actually, gives far much more credence to this particular issue. So I just wanted to thank you for your leadership on and around that.
Well, thank you, Lewis. I appreciate that, because this is what we want to do. We definitely want people to understand that criminal justice is not just you see somebody go to jail and that's the end. That's the end of their story. That everybody around us is everybody's impacted when someone goes to jail. Community, jobs, employment, health, well-being, everything is impacted. And so it is our pleasure and our privilege and our honor to sort of, bring this awareness to people's focus in ways that they had no idea. So there you go.
Absolutely. And I'll answer the question that's above, but I also just wanted to add just to your notion as well, right? Oftentimes when we think about our criminal justice system, we have a tendency to do so within the framework of people actually going to prison and or jail, right?
Yes.
However, those individuals who have been, adjudicated guilty in our nation's courtroom, specifically in the state of Connecticut, they have just as much equal stake in this issue than those who have actually been incarcerated. I think that what happens oftentimes is that the felony conviction in and of itself can actually incarcerate a person far much longer than any term of imprisonment that a judge might be able to sentence an offender to. So, I just wanted to, really stretch that out and acknowledge those people who very well may not necessarily, have gone through BCC or have a 6-digit quote unquote inmate number from the Department of Corrections, but they have actually stood in front of a judge. They've had charges, read against them by, the Connecticut State Attorney's Office, and they very well may have had to plead guilty because they may not have had access to resources and power. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
That's a good point. That is a very good point, Lewis.
Thank you. So what is Cut 50? Cut 50 is a bipartisan organization, co-founded by Van Jones, CNN political commentator, and just all around life extraordinaire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also co-founded by Jessica Jackson Sloan, who is our national director. And we just have a very simplistic goal to be able to cut our criminal justice population, specifically around incarceration, in half. And that's what it's a bipartisan organization where we work with both sides of the aisle, whether you're right wing, whether you're left wing. We just want to work with both sides of the of the plane so that we can actually make it fly and be able to create real systemic change and have an indelible impact in our criminal justice system.
Okay, so how's that working in this climate? Because this is a tough climate.
It is a very tough climate, but I think that the people, such as yourself, myself, Van Jones, and everyone else who is involved in this work, we're tougher, right? The circumstances and the situations that we have actually been through in life create us for a tough climate. It creates us. And it gives us a resilience that is stronger than the spring in a ballpoint pen. Specifically, we are working on a very aggressive and very robust legislative agenda. It's actually called the First Step Act, and that is a federal agenda. And it passed with overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives this August. It is a bill that in and of itself, at its original concept, was very thin. And if you just, allow me to indulge for about 60 seconds.
Oh no, absolutely, because we got to lay this out so that we know, so we can understand what is happening.
Absolutely. So just speaking to Van Jones's and Jessica Jackson Sloan, our national director and her co-founder, speaking to their brilliance. Jared Kushner is, he talks without compunction about, his father having been impacted by the criminal justice system where he served federal time. Initially, Jared Kushner, who is President Trump's son-in-law, he introduced a bill that was very thin, if not skeletal, in its original concept. It was called the First Step Act. And essentially what that was doing in the proposal for it, it proposed to be able to expand telephone time and visiting hours for people who are incarcerated on a federal level.
Mm-hmm.
When Cut 50 and other organizations got involved, they said, okay, this is not enough. This has to go beyond, just the expansion of, telephonic communication and also in-person, family visits. So it got far much more robust, where there were several provisions that were introduced on the prison reform side, and I'll just walk you through some of them.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, it calls for women who are incarcerated to have a sense of decency and dignity. What does that look like as proposed in this bill? I'm glad that you asked, because I'll tell you. It actually calls for women to be for the prohibition of women being shackled while they are pregnant. Not only while they are pregnant, but also during childbirth as well, and also postpartum, similar to SB 13 that state of Connecticut passed.
Yes, I was just going to say, we just passed something very similar to that.
Yeah, so similar to that bill, it's the First Step Act actually requires that provision therein. Also, it would unlock education access for approximately 16,000 people who are federally incarcerated, waiting for basic literacy, waiting for basic GED testing, waiting for vocational education and the likes thereof. at the outset of our of your broadcast, you talked about this, right? You talked about people who are returning back into our communities, potential change agents, potential people, who could be in positions, such as myself, right, to be actually affecting policy, so on and so forth. How are these people going to come back into our communities? How are these people going to return back to the, state of Connecticut if they don't necessarily have access to basic literacy and not be waitlisted because education personnel within the Federal Bureau of Prisons are actually deferred, to custody, right? Rather than having teachers in classrooms, you actually have teachers who are not necessarily outfitted for the specific role to be, supervising and monitoring people who are incarcerated, in cell blocks, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
that would unlock education access in that regard. Also, in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I know this personally because I served nearly 14 years in federal prison. The Federal Bureau of Prisons can actually designate you to a facility that is beyond 500 miles from your last known address.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as it stands theoretically, they say, hey, we place people within 500 miles, but that 500 miles are air miles and not driving miles. So, Babs, when you consider this, right, consider a loved one that you very well may have that's incarcerated. And we are from Connecticut. The closest federal facility would be Danbury.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Federal Bureau of Prisons very well may send someone out to Florida,
Oh,
right?
I
Think,
truly understand that because I served time at Danbury Federal Prison Camp, and there was, I mean, I was so glad that I was able to serve in Connecticut because I live in
hmm
Connecticut and my children were here. But
hmm
you're absolutely right. They could have said, well, you know what? You have to go to Florida or you have to go wherever.
yeah, correct. And think about the not only just the financial hardship, right, that your family would have had to endure in addition to you being incarcerated, but think about the emotional toll, right? Think about like how that would have threatened to unravel the tapestry of your family structure if your kids didn't have, the level of access to you with frequency as they did if you were not in Danbury. So
No, go
what we
ahead.
are proposing in the first. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'll wait till you
Oh,
finish. Go ahead, my dear.
so what we are proposing within the First Step Act is to have families, people who are designated within 500 driving miles of
Mm-hmm.
their last known address. And there are, a few other key provisions in there on the sentencing side. It would actually call for retroactivity for 851. 851 is a federal statute that disproportionately impacts people of color. 924C, which is another federal statute. FSA, which is the Fair Sentencing Act, that would actually reduce the crack cocaine disparity from 18 to 1 and bring it down to 1 to 1, and also be able to expand the safety valve and give judges far much more judicial discretion in sentencing than being restricted by the advisory guidelines.
So, do you think, Lewis, that having, because I don't think anybody really talks about the distance where people go and where they should serve their time. Do you think
Mhm.
that do you think this is a consequence of incarceration that can be drastically changed so that we don't put further hardship or burden on folks who have to serve their time?
Well, this is what I think. I think that when you are when you're having a conversation like this with the general public, people will say, "Well, if a person, you know, don't do crime if you don't want to do the time. And
Yes.
in addition to that, if you don't want to do the time, beyond the community that you were actually are from, right? And what my level of awareness, where I try to raise people's conscious level within conversations like that, is as such. Yes, people have been convicted of crimes. There is definitely a power analysis, that we can delve into that, kind of like goes into intergenerational areas of thinking, pathologies, and community, so on and so forth, that actually facilitate, curate, and perpetuate, certain, criminal activities, right? That's one thing, and that's, a conversation for an entire different broadcast. But specific to your point, I think that we don't consider the human factor. We don't consider the human factor, right? The fact of the matter is that approximately 80% of people who are incarcerated will return home. Studies have shown, this is published in scientific journals, etc. When you have close family ties, it actually reduces the probability of a person reoffending and or being involved in institutional continual criminal enterprising, such as assaults on staff, assaults on other people who are actually incarcerated, so on and so forth. So even if you disagree that people should be accommodated, quote unquote accommodated, when they are incarcerated, specifically on a federal level, I think that we would definitely agree with people should be people should be within proximity to their family so that it can actually reduce the probability of reoffending post incarceration.
So, Lewis, when you have these conversations at the congressional level, are you met with the same sort of comments or opinions that you get from everyday, ordinary folks? I mean, is there a different kind of listening that happens at that congressional level that you feel hopeful, or that this could possibly, you could get some congressional leadership to get behind this and give it wings? I'm just trying to understand, like, how far apart are everyday, ordinary folks from congressional leadership?
Yeah, and I think that people at their core, right, irrespective to whether you are, in a position of politics or if you are in a position of poverty, I think that people at their core, they want to do right by other people. And I'm just one of those people who, unapologetically, I believe in the best in people, and I believe that people have the best intentions. Oftentimes, those intentions don't necessarily show up properly informed because they come from a space of privilege, right? They come from a space of, people who are disconnected from issues as such. Hence the reason why we have, conversations like this. Hence the reason why we have people like, Jeff Grant and BABZ and, Lewis Reeds and, Fred Hodges and, Sandy Lamonicos and all of the other people who are within the state of Connecticut and, expanded nationwide, walking into spaces so that we can actually increase their level of empathy, so that we can actually, give them an understanding to say, hey, yes, we understand that you are in a position of power. We understand that you are in a position of affluence and influence, so on and so forth. And you very well may be disconnected from these issues. However, when we walk into a room, you don't just get me. You get the, entire representation of the, more than 200,000 people who are incarcerated on a federal level vicariously in my voice.
Do you feel like you carry that? I mean, but that's a lot of weight, Lewis. Do you feel like that everywhere you go, you carry that? I mean, I feel it because as a Black woman, I think everywhere I go, so goes where and when I enter, so goes the race, right? That's
Right.
I can't change that. But if you don't say, if you don't even hint at, you don't have to carry that weight, but you choose to carry it. And how important is that to you to represent in that manner?
I don't necessarily even look at it as a weight, to be honest with you. I think that this is part of my purpose. This is part of my, of my makeup, right? I don't mean to take people to church on a Friday, but there's a scripture in the Gospel of John where Jesus, responded. Jesus was the, probably the most prominent social justice reformer to ever walk this earth. And irrespective to whether you disagree with his theology, I think that it's hard to argue against his humanity. And he said something that's very pointed that stays with me, right? And I include it into my prayer when I walk into spaces. And he simply said, but quite profoundly, he said, "For this cause was I born," right? And consider it, Babs. Speaking without compunction and in all transparency. Um, I was rearrested, right? And there were people who wrote me off. People said that he will never have another opportunity. His rearrest was irrespective to whether it was a difference of character or aberration of judgment, etc. He set the criminal justice community back, specifically in the state of Connecticut, right? Number one, I'm an unapologetic a person of faith. Number two, I'm still involved in this work, right? After a rearrest, right? Facing a prosecution, the work has to be done. So I don't necessarily look at it as a weight. I look at it as actually a part of my calling. I had to make a very intentional and deliberate choice after I was rearrested if I was going to go and hide under a rock and just retreat into a space of nothingness, which in part I almost did. Right, last year around this time, I literally was going to commit suicide. Because I felt as though that I failed, my community. I felt people who had a level of trust in me. I felt as though that I, was a trophy of inspiration and beacon of hope, for so many people throughout the state of Connecticut and beyond that, right? I felt as though that I felt God and my family and myself. And I was literally going to commit suicide. And, I remember, being in Bridgeport, I remember, having some over-the-counter sleep aids, and I was in the backseat of my SUV, and I heard a small voice, and it wasn't in dramatic fashion, but it was just very small. And it said, rejoice not against me, O my enemies, for when I fall, I shall rise again. When I sit in darkness, then the Lord will be a light unto me. And as I began to sit in that thought, I also heard that scripture from the book of John, for this cause was I born, right? And I wasn't born for the cause, to be the subject of public ridicule and, Facebook shares, with the article as it relates to my rearrest. I was born to be a voice of people who are muted, to be, a champion of people who are disenfranchised and, disproportionately impacted by this system, even with a criminal case.
Mm-hmm.
And, I emerged from that saying to myself, this is not a burden for me. This is part of my purpose. And, I have to continue to walk in my purpose no matter, who says what about me, no matter, how much I have contributed to, my fall from grace. The fact of the matter is that I still have to walk in purpose. And when you walk in purpose, eventually, you ultimately land on your feet and you continue to have the hearts and the spirits and the everything else that you can imagine from people who are impacted by issues like this. You carry that with you and you bring them into those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for the record, I don't think anybody falls from grace. I think people fall to God. I don't think people fall from grace. At least that's it took me a minute to figure that out for myself, because shame is a real thing, and you feel so low, and I understand all of that you shared, and I appreciate that, but that too is a part of reentry. That is a part of this whole reentry piece, that people get out. Sometimes they go back in. Sometimes they get out. Sometimes they go back in, according to whatever's going on in their lives. And too often we are quick to write people off, and we're quick to throw people away. But this is what I know, because I serve a God that calls and sins.
Amen, sister. You better,
I do.
You better not preach on this Friday morning.
I serve a God that calls and sins, and oftentimes God calls the most broken of us to be the wounded leaders, I think.
Yes,
I mean, it's too easy to call people who just got it all together, because I don't know if they have anything to say to the population. But I think those that have come through are the ones that could say, look, I came through even with this, even in the midst of that,
Yes.
even. And
Yes.
you just come through and you keep, and people are like, how do you keep moving? Well, because I serve a
Yes.
God that calls and sends. So,
That's right.
so your
And
story is
and
beautiful.
even beyond that, I think that when you emerge from issues, as I experienced, right? I think that it gives you a greater appreciation, just for greater, new opportunities that present themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was just having a conversation with one of the congressional leaders, and I was, sharing with her how oftentimes when you think about reentry, you think about it, and with this linear notion, right? And as if it's this straight line process as to where a person gets out of jail, and all they need is a job, and then poof, everything is all good with the world, right? And you don't think about like the biopsychosocial issues that in the collateral, in the ancillary things that actually accompany him or her, right? That could contribute to just a split second decision that could, have that person re-involved in the criminal justice system. Primarily family, right? As in my case, I knew that I couldn't be drawn to the allures of selling drugs, or the run of the mill things that you think about when you think about re-involvement in the criminal justice system, or even friends, right? In my particular situation, it was two situations that were very family involved. It was a family involved orientation, and where I emerged from that conversation and with that congressional leader is that the only thing that is linear on an EKG is a person who doesn't have a pulse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about life in and of itself, whether that's reentry from the criminal justice system, whether that is rehabilitation from substance abuse, to anything, right? Recovery from a divorce, etc. It has its peaks, it has its lows. It may level out a bit, but the fact of the matter is that, just like how you talked about, right, we have to keep going on. And the moment that we stand still, that's the moment that we literally very well may flatline. So oftentimes when you see people like, and I will, say to your listening audience, when you see people such as myself, when you see people such as BABZ, when you see people such as Jeff Grants and the like thereof, when you see us moving, it's not necessarily because we have this great tenacity and we have this great sense of resolve. No, in all actuality, and truth be told, we keep moving because we know that if we stop, we very well could be in a far much graver circumstance than staying mobile.
Tell me about the Just Leadership experience, because you are 2017 Just Leadership. Do you say graduate? Do you say fellow? What do you alum?
Fellow.
Yes.
I guess, yeah. I'm a 2017 Just Leadership fellow. Just Leadership is an organization that was founded by Glenn Martin, uh, who is probably one of the most brilliant minds that I have, had the very distinct pleasure of being mentored by, and just having my leadership develop within the framework of criminal justice reform. Uh, that was a year-long fellowship where the enrollees, have been identified. These are people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system and are leading, um, the criminal justice work in our respective fields. Um, it comprises of people such as Tara Simmons, who is a registered nurse, a former registered nurse, and now a JD in Washington State. She was actually just admitted to the bar in Washington State, having gone to the highest court in her land in order to be able to do so. I stand in the shadow of people, well, in the company, I should say, of people such as Khalil Cumberbatch, who is the senior vice president at the Fortune Society, Sandy Lamonaco, who is the Smart Justice uh, coordinator for the ACLU in the state of Connecticut. I'm just in great company, and that year long fellowship, really took my leadership that existed, you know, that I thought existed on a 10 and actually amplified it by 100. Um, and it helped us with, strategic communication. It helped us, with, networking. It helped us really with owning who we were as leaders, not as people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, but by leaders who could actually impact the criminal justice system through our experience.
Mm-hmm. I believe Beatrice. Were you in a cohort with Beatrice Codiani? Because I know she came.
Yes.
She's a good friend of mine.
Yes.
She came to that program. I was so proud.
Yeah, absolutely. Beatrice is doing a phenomenal work with Swan in Connecticut.
Yes.
And I was remiss not to. Yeah, I was actually remiss not to. Just shout out the women leadership throughout the state of Connecticut. Beatrice has been actually in this work, doing this work far much longer than I have, and I defer to her and look at. I look to her leadership as kind of like being one of the forerunners for people such as myself. When I was in federal prison, she was out here in the streets, pounding the pavements, doing the work, making sure that the voices of women who had specifically been impacted by the criminal justice system, involved with sex trafficking, et cetera, that their voices were actually being heard. So yeah, she's actually doing phenomenal things.
So tell me, how are you spending your time these days?
Well, I don't spend my time; I invest it. I think that
Whoa!
anything that
I have to use that, Lewis, when I talk to my kids. I'm like, listen, you invest your time. I like that.
That's right. Yeah, anything that you invest, you expect a return on. But anything that you spend, you don't necessarily see an appreciation of it. So I invest my time. I have a few things going on, in addition to, the role that I'm doing at Cut 50. I recently was in a policy capacity. I had the very distinct privilege of being in a policy capacity through the Cattell Center for Health, Equity, and Justice. They're actually based.
Yes, we had them on. The brother that was one of the founders, tall brother,
Lorenzo Jones.
Yes, we had him
Lorenzo
on
Jones.
early in the year. He is something. He's got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
That
one. Lorenzo has a lot of energy. Absolutely. So that was my former role. I'm just leading the work. Wherever I can be, in order to be a light that is on a hill, and allow my light to shine before men. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's where I'm trying to be. I'm literally working on another book that should be postured to be published. I've secretly been working on it. Like, a lot of people don't even notice. Like, like family doesn't notice. Like, when I'm in front of my computer,
you're working.
My kids, my wife. Nobody knows kind of like what I'm doing. Like, they just think that I'm like internet surfing, etc. But I'm actually working on another book. I published a book while I actually wrote a book while I was incarcerated. The name of the book is called 9 Steps to Fall Up When You Trip Down.
Mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of receiving Author of the Year award in the spiritual category at the Indie Author Legacy Awards in 2016.
Wow! Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm actually working on another book, and the name of that book is actually called Life Will Not Be the Death of Me.
Mm-hmm.
So readers can expect that with probably early 2019.
Are you finding great pleasure in writing? Are you finding do you find it cathartic? Do you find it healing? What drives you to write?
Writing is an outlet for me that it's therapeutic for me. It's beyond cathartic. Writing for me is almost like it's comparable to me going to church, right? It's comparable to me being in worship with God. that is where I can kind of like just be able to, give the world a glimpse of what I call the diary issues of my life, right? And I'll try to, lead and just share my experiences with other people, and hopefully, readers can actually connect with my experiences. Even my contributions to the Huffington Post. I can't tell you, Babs, how many people, when I published the article, how PTSD almost made me commit suicide. And when I was talking about PTSD, I wasn't talking about post traumatic stress disorder. I was talking about prison traumatic stress syndrome. And, I very candidly, I talked about, the rearrest. I talked about, my, the notion of that suicide attempt, et cetera. And I can't tell you how many people, when I published that, they didn't have they didn't have the temerity, and they didn't have the gall to go public with what they shared with me privately. But I had so many people, in my DM on Instagram. I had so many people, who inboxed me on Twitter. I had so many people who, messaged me on Facebook to say, you know what, like, I so much appreciate your story, and I appreciate you, just your vulnerability, and really, allowing me to see a sense or reflection of myself in your issue.
Mm-hmm.
And if life can deliver you from that, and if God can give you the strength to keep going through that, then I can make it through another day. And that's what writing does for me, right? When I write, I just try to share my experience, hoping that someone would actually be able to connect with the things that I have gone through, because they very well may be going through what I came out of.
So is the issue around your rearrest, is it resolved, or it is moving in process?
It is still moving in process. We're very hopeful about the outcome. But it definitely still is it's in process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But again, speaking to the conviction, right, of being in this work and being oriented, and really having a purpose, right? For this cause was I born. Most people would say, I'm not going to, do anything else. I'm going to go get a job at McDonald's. I'm going to, go over here and be, in this nebulous place and be obscure and be, absolutely incognito, and, not do things. And I'm just one of those people as to where, like, the work has to be done,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm going to just make as much of a contribution to this work as I can.
That's a good way to be, I think. And I'm glad you're not hiding, because hiding doesn't serve anybody.
Thank you.
It really doesn't. And listen, people that come out of prison, and this, I mean, they already have pressure and stress, and a modicum of shame, right? And so, and they can't hide. You can't hide. You got to be in the world, and you have to do stuff. You got to move around. You got to make things happen. And although people may want you to hide, that's not what God calls you to do. So
that's right. And something, one of my other mentors within the state of Connecticut, surprisingly, is Jeff Grant. And a
Jeff
lot of people,
is the salt of the earth.
Yeah,
he is the salt of the
Jeff
earth.
Is. When you think about, a lot of people when they imagine Jeff, right, they look at his business savvy. They look at his him being the executive director of Family Reentry. They look at him through the roles of so many other secular frameworks. But Jeff is an ordained minister, right? And Jeff is an undying friend and a very trusted mentor. And through my process, Jeff has been one of those people who has encouraged me not to hide. Mm-hmm. Jeff has been one of those people who have encouraged me to lean into this issue, to really have far much more a greater amplification of my own experience through mediums such as this, right? Leveraging my voice, using my experience to talk about how not only how criminal conviction can, stigmatize you and marginalize you, etc. But also have it about how, re-involvement in the criminal justice system after you have been on a so-called perch, how that can, you know, amplify that stigma and that marginalization, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to shout Jeff out, just for being that great source of strength for me, and just a quiet space of 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 confidence
Mm-hmm.
when I need it.
So, before we go, talk a little bit, Lewis, about what has this whole experience taught you? What has your life taught you thus far?
Uh, and you mean in the 21 years that I've only been alive?
Well, yes, at any point, jump in. At any point, like where have been the best lessons and the best aha moments? How Oprah goes, that aha moment when everything become, you see things for what they are for those few minutes, and it becomes crystal clear about purpose or direction or message. Where in your life have you had those moments where you like, okay, all right, I see this, or I get this, or I feel this, or I understand this?
Yeah. So I think that I think that I want to lead with this. Successes give you the successes that we have in life, right? It gives us confidence, but the setbacks, they give us character. Let me say that again in the event if your listening audience actually missed it. Successes give us confidence. Setbacks give us character. Where I have found the most character being developed in my life has been through setbacks. Those setbacks have been, in the institution of marriage. Those setbacks have been within my responsibility as a father. Those setbacks have been in my professionalism as professionally I should say, as the reentry director for the former reentry director for the city of Bridgeport. Right, those setbacks have given me so much more character than any measure of success has given me confidence. And it's been in my falls in life. It's been in those places that don't necessarily show up well in stat sheets, right? It's been in the places where, people don't necessarily want to touch in the unglamorous, the non-glamour spaces in life, where I fell miserably. Things that don't may not even necessarily be blogged about, things that may not necessarily show up in the Connecticut Post, or things that people may not tweet about. These are not the things that I post. These are not the ugly pictures that I actually post on Instagram, right? Um, those are the spaces in life where I've actually learned the most. And I think that, not that I want to continue, right? Because those ugly places they hurt. But I think that for me, throughout the course of my life, when I've looked back, literally from the time when both of my parents were incarcerated when I was 5 years old, they were incarcerated federally. Throughout my life trajectory to when I was shot. I had a near fatal a gunshot wound to my chest when I was 14 years old. To when I lost my cousin in 1992 when he was shot, nearly 32 times in front of his mother. When I, go back, push a little bit, further ahead to, 1999 when I was involved in a drive-by shooting and inadvertently, shot a 5-year-old a child, right? When I look back to I should say, when I come up to my prison experience where I served nearly 14 years in federal prison, right? When I was in solitary confinement, when I was released, when I failed, to a degree in my marriage and, that was recalibrated, et cetera, right? When I look at the trajectory of my life and I see these moments that stand out, um, are the lessons that those are the spaces where I've learned the most valuable lessons. And emerging from that, I think what it has taught me, in addition to the aforementioned, is this: I don't let every win go to my head, but at the same time, I'm not going to allow a loss to go to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in between that where I've actually learned the greatest lessons, in whatever situation or circumstance that I find myself
That's a good lesson. Those are wonderful
in.
lessons. And I think they ought to be in somebody's book, because I think folks can wrap their brains and hearts around and it's so simple. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a
Yeah,
very
yeah,
simplistic sort of message that anybody can grasp onto and carry with them, right? So that's a beautiful thing.
yeah.
So one last thing, what is your biggest hope or dream these days? Like, what do you want moving
Oh,
forward? Like, if Lewis is standing, if we're back here in like 5 years, what would have been the great love?
so a few things. Number one, I want to be able to be, the I don't want to be a public success, but in a private failure. That's number one. 5 years from now, whether it's 5 days from now, whether it's 5 hours from now, I want to be able to look back at my experience, and be able to have people say about me privately what those who may not necessarily know me publicly, allow that there be an alignment with that, and that there be some congruence in that. I don't want to be a public success, but a private failure. That's number one. I don't want to be I want to do right by my family. I want to make sure that I am making contributions to my community,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately, I want to be better through my experiences than how I was previously. But more specifically, I want to be able to reduce our criminal justice system in half. That I mean that's my goal. I think that the state of Connecticut is on par in doing such. I think that Commissioner Simple is probably one of the most progressive DOC commissioners that I have ever had the pleasure of sitting on panels with, and engaging in conversations with, etc. Um, uh, so I think that Connecticut is on par for such. You know, 5 years from now, I want to be on not the. I will hope that we will be on the Fifth Step Act, right? Where and not the first step. I'm hoping that on the federal side, on the federal legislative side, I'm hoping that we would be able to have such sweeping criminal justice reform in our federal system, that it literally puts people out of jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no more work to be done. That we can shift to something else. We can go into you won't need a radio program where we're talking about criminal justice
Hey,
reform
hey,
issues.
hey.
We won't have. but you know what? One of
I
the
know what you
I had the
mean. I
opportunity
know what you mean.
to have I had a conversation to yeah I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Ambassador Andrew Young, who was Dr. King's lieutenant, right hand man, etc. And he told me, he said, Louis, if you remember nothing else out of this work, he said that you should be wanting to work yourself out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, what that means, what he was telling me, is that you should be so focused, you should be so invested, you should be, have such a drive that you should want to solve all of the issues that are facing you in your lifetime, so that this doesn't become an issue for somebody who is coming behind you. That's the mindset that you should have. And, it would be my hope that we will literally work ourselves out of a job. Now, hopefully, we can retire with something that's going to be lucrative, right? but I would hope that we won't have to have a conversation around criminal justice issues, because we will have resolved that. I would hope that we won't have to have conversations around gender based discrimination, because we would have resolved that. I would hope that we won't have to have conversations about voter disenfranchisement, because we would have resolved that. We are the change that we are looking for, and that's in all actuality, within the next 5 years, that is my hope. It is a very high hope, But the fact of the matter is that it's my hope and it exists, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Lewis Reed. And I'm so glad that you had opportunity to come on and share a little bit about your personal life and about this work that we all are doing around criminal justice. So I appreciate you. This morning, listeners, you were here with us on Criminal Justice Insider with BABZ, RAWLS-IVY, and Jeff Grant. And we were talking to Mr. Lewis Reed, the national organizer for Cut 50. And this show is sponsored happily by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, now more than ever. Lewis, thank you. I hope you come back and fill us in on what's going on with you in your life. May God continue to bless you and keep you and your family well.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And if I just very well may, just a shameless plug for your listening audience, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Lewis, Louis, the letter L, Reed. Also, you can find me on Facebook at Lewis L. Reed, in Instagram as well.
Perfect.
Lewis L. Reed on all platforms.
Yay. And this will be uploaded to SoundCloud, and then when it becomes it will become a written piece in the New Haven Independent in a few days. And so we'll make sure that you have access to that too.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely day.
Likewise, you are the queen. Grace and peace to you.
Thank you, my dear.